The Dark Souls series is well known for its challenging boss fights, and Dark Souls 3 hosts a diverse roster of bosses ready to ruin your day. Some bosses in this game are considered incredibly easy, while some bosses redefine what players consider challenging. I'm Will from GameRant, and today we're ranking the top 10 hardest bosses in Dark Souls 3. Number 10. The Abyss Watchers. What makes a Dark Souls boss fight harder is having many bosses to contend with. The Abyss Watchers require the player to fight at least 2 Watchers at the same time, both of which have tricky movesets. The Watchers luckily are weak to lightning damage and can be backstabbed and parried. The Watchers also lack a lot of health to balance out their fast movement, and will occasionally fight each other. Players should stock up on gold pine resin for lightning damage and stay alert to avoid damage and make the most of opportunities. Number 9. Lorien, Elder Prince, and Lothric, Younger Prince. After a difficult journey, the Ashen One will face the princes Lorien and Lothric. The twin princes balance out the fight, with one being a melee sword fighter and the other one being a spellcaster that constantly supports the other. The goal of this fight is to take down Lothric, who is continually reviving Lorien. Players should utilize lightning, frostbite, and magic damage in order to exploit the prince's weaknesses. If the player focuses on dealing damage to Lothric whenever Lorien is down and is able to take him out quickly, then the fight will be a little less maddening. Number 8. Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. Aldrich, Devourer of Gods certainly has a title fitting of a challenging boss fight. The fight also deliberately references Ornstein and Smough, which is an infamous boss fight from Dark Souls 1 in its own right. Not to mention, the top half of Aldrich is the half-eaten body of Gwendolyn, another major figure from the original Dark Souls. Gwendolyn's body will shoot magic attacks at the player, which they should avoid by using the pillars around the room. In terms of damage, the player should use the Farron Greatsword or Wolf Knight's Greatsword to take advantage of Aldrich's abyssal nature. Aldrich is also weak to lightning, fire, and thrust damage, all of which the player will have access to at this point. Number 7. Dancer of the Boreal Valley. Like the name suggests, the dancer's attacks are a graceful flurry of blows that the player must dodge to find openings. What makes it even more difficult is the small size of the room you fight the dancer in, combined with the wide reach of her attacks. In order to maximize the damage you're able to deal, the player should use dark damage and aim for the dancer's head to stagger her. Dark damage is tough to find this early in the game, but using the human pine resin can grant that damage for a short time. Number 6. Pontiff Sullivan. Pontiff Sullivan is a boss that still haunts the memory of many Dark Souls fans. He wields 2 swords that can be absolutely devastating if the player cannot figure out how to avoid their attacks. Luckily, the Pontiff's attacks mirror each other, so if you can dodge the first attack, you can dodge the second. Sullivan is weak to thrust, lightning, and fire damage, and players should look to combine these in order to end the fight as quickly as possible. There's also the opportunity to summon an NPC for this fight, which players might consider to help. Number 5. Sister Frieda and Father Ariandel. The final boss fight of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, Sister Frieda and Father Ariandel are a challenging duo fitting of a Souls DLC. The fight is multi-phase, with each phase introducing a new element. The first phase is a one-on-one with Frieda, the second combines Father Ariandel with Frieda, and the last is an all-out fight with Frieda employing frost magic. The player is able to summon Slave Knight Gale for this fight, and it is highly recommended doing so in order to balance out a tricky fight. Ariandel is weak to a bunch of different damage, but Frieda is a different story. She is resistant to every type of damage except for strike damage, but strike damage is hard to use in this fight based on her speed and how slow strike weapons can attack. Number 4. Soul of Cinder. The Soul of Cinder is the final boss of Dark Souls 3 and the combination of every Lord of Cinder throughout history. Being the final challenge most players will face in the game, he is incredibly tough with high HP and quick attacks. The Soul of Cinder is weak to lightning and dark damage, which players should use to their fullest effect in order to level the playing field. Players should be ready to dodge devastating attacks and strike in the small windows they have available. Number 3. Dark Eater Midir. With plenty of dragon fights in the Souls series, it really says something that Midir manages to be one of the hardest and most memorable in the entire series. Midir is entirely optional, meaning that this challenge can be ignored if the player desires. The best strategy for taking on Midir is to fight them head on. The player should use lightning damage and stay close to Midir's head to keep track of their telegraphed attacks and do plenty of damage. They can also use the Farron Greatsword, the Wolf Knight's Greatsword, or the Pestilent Mist Sorcery 3 to great effect. Number 2. Slave Knight Gale. Many consider Slave Knight Gale to be the final boss of the Dark Souls series within the lore. As you might expect, the final boss of the series lore is no pushover. He has blazing speed with devastating damage and only slows down in the next 2 phases where he uses more ranged attacks. In the first phase, Gale is able to be staggered with a heavy weapon, meaning that players can take advantage of that. He is also weak to frost and poison damage as well as slashing damage. Gale's attacks are telegraphed with a lot more speed than one might anticipate, but with sharp reflexes and the right damage, players can defeat the Slave Knight. Number 1. The Nameless King. Despite having no name and being entirely optional, the Nameless King has become an infamous challenge among the Dark Souls community. Located on Archdragon Peak and summoned by ringing the Great Belfry, the Nameless King arrives on the back of a Stormdrake. The first phase of the fight is a battle with the Stormdrake, meaning that players should use lightning damage to take down the Drake and move on to the second phase. In the second phase, the Nameless King takes on the player personally. He is weak to dark and fire damage and has a large amount of health combined with his heavy damage output. The best strategy for this fight is to keep light or medium load in order to dodge the boss's many punishing attacks. That was our ranking of the top 10 hardest Dark Souls 3 bosses. For more content and articles like this, be sure to check out GameRant.com. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more on YouTube, and we'll see you next time.